A frigid winter night in South Dakota. A car accident. 3 young people. 2 bodies discovered months apart. And a mystery that continues to haunt investigators to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, before we dive into one of South Dakota's most perplexing cold cases, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss our future true crime investigations. December 12th, 1992. Lake Andes, South Dakota. The temperature had plummeted to well below freezing. 20-year-old Arnold Archambeau, his girlfriend Ruby Bruguier, age 19, and Ruby's cousin Tracy Dion were driving through the quiet streets of their small town. None of them could have known that this ordinary night would turn into one of South Dakota's most baffling mysteries. At approximately 3:30 a.m., while approaching the intersection of U.S. Highway 18 and 281, their car failed to navigate a turn. The vehicle rolled into a shallow ditch filled with icy water. Tracy Dion, who was in the back seat, managed to crawl out of the overturned vehicle. She looked around for Arnold and Ruby, but couldn't find them anywhere. They had seemingly vanished into the bitter cold night. If you're finding this case as intriguing as I do, give this video a quick thumbs up. It really helps support our channel. The initial search was extensive. Law enforcement, along with local volunteers, combed the area thoroughly. They used boats to search the water-filled ditch. They brought in tracking dogs. They even employed helicopters with infrared sensors. But Arnold and Ruby had disappeared without a trace. Tracy Dion's account of that night would prove crucial to the investigation. She remembered Arnold climbing out of the driver's side window. Ruby followed shortly after. But what happened next defies logical explanation. The temperature that night was a bone-chilling -5 degrees Fahrenheit, -20 degrees Celsius. The ground was covered in snow. Any footprints should have been clearly visible. Yet investigators found no tracks leading away from the accident scene. It was as if Arnold and Ruby had simply vanished. Here's where this case takes an even darker turn. If you're invested in solving cold cases like this one, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. We dive deep into unexplained mysteries every week. 3 months passed. The harsh South Dakota winter maintained its grip on the land. Then, on March 27th, 1993, a startling discovery was made. Arnold's body was found floating in the same ditch where the accident had occurred. The location? Mere feet from where the car had overturned. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. Arnold's body showed no signs of ice formation that would be expected if he had been submerged for the entire 3 months. His body was in a different state of decomposition than would be expected for someone who had been in the water since December. The questions multiplied. Why wasn't his body found during the initial search? How could he have remained unfound in such a small body of water? And where was Ruby? The discovery of Arnold's body raised more questions than answers. The investigation was about to take an even more perplexing turn. If you're just joining us, make sure to watch part 1 to understand the full scope of this baffling case. 2 months after finding Arnold, on May 27, 1993, Ruby Bruguier's body was finally discovered in the exact same ditch, just 75 feet from where Arnold had been found. The location had been searched extensively multiple times over the previous 5 months. The water level in the ditch had remained relatively constant. How had her body suddenly appeared in an area that had been meticulously combed through? Like Arnold's body, Ruby's remains presented their own set of puzzling forensic questions. Her body showed signs of having been exposed to the elements, but the decomposition pattern didn't match what would be expected if she had been in the water since December. Her clothing was relatively clean and showed minimal degradation, inconsistent with 5 months of water exposure. If you're finding these forensic details as fascinating as they are disturbing, consider hitting that subscribe button. We dive deep into the scientific aspects of cold cases every week. The medical examiner's findings only deepen the mystery. Both victims had died from exposure to the cold, but the exact timeline of their deaths couldn't be definitively established. The condition of their bodies suggested they might have died weeks, not months, after the accident. But if that were true, where had they been all that time? Tracy Dion's testimony became increasingly crucial as investigators tried to piece together the puzzle. She recalled specific details about that night that painted a vivid picture of the moments before Arnold and Ruby's disappearance. The three of them had been at a party earlier in the evening. Arnold had been drinking, but witnesses described him as coherent and capable of making decisions. The accident itself was relatively minor. The car had rolled onto its side in a ditch that contained only about 3 feet of water. Tracy remembered the sequence clearly. Arnold climbed out first, followed by Ruby. Tracy heard them moving around outside the vehicle. Then, silence. What makes this case particularly haunting is the complete lack of witness sightings during the period between the accident and the discovery of the bodies. Lake Andes is a small community of roughly 800 people. Everyone knows everyone. Yet not a single confirmed sighting of either Arnold or Ruby was reported during those months. Speaking of our community, if you're enjoying this deep dive into one of South Dakota's most puzzling cases, take a second to give this video a thumbs up. It helps other true crime enthusiasts find our channel. The investigation uncovered more perplexing details. The night of the accident, temperatures were well below freezing, and the ground was covered in fresh snow. Any tracks leading away from the scene should have been clearly visible. Yet responding officers found no footprints other than those of Tracy Dion and the first responders. The ditch itself became a point of intense scrutiny. It was thoroughly searched multiple times by different teams using various methods. Initial responders conducted a physical search of the immediate area. Dive teams explored the ditch within hours of the accident. Boats equipped with sonar scanned the water. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment surveyed the region. Tracking dogs were brought in to search the surrounding area. Local volunteers conducted grid searches of the entire vicinity. None of these efforts yielded any signs of Arnold or Ruby. The ditch was not particularly large or deep. It was a routine drainage ditch alongside the highway, the kind that local law enforcement had searched countless times before. The water was clear enough that objects on the bottom were visible from the surface. The timeline of events raised even more questions. Arnold's body was discovered after the spring thaw, which might explain why it became visible then. But Ruby's body wasn't found until 2 months later in the same area. The water level had remained relatively stable during this period, and multiple searches had been conducted between the discovery of Arnold's body and finding Ruby. Investigators began to explore every possible scenario. Could Arnold and Ruby have initially survived the accident and sought shelter somewhere? If so, why didn't they contact their families? The couple had a 4-month-old daughter together. Ruby also had a 3-year-old son from a previous relationship. By all accounts, they were devoted parents who wouldn't have willingly abandoned their children. The FBI became involved in the case, bringing additional resources and expertise. They conducted extensive interviews with family members, friends, and residents of the Lake Andes community. They retraced every step of the investigation, reviewed all the evidence, and analyzed the search patterns used in the initial response. As our channel continues to explore cases like this one, we'd love to have you join our true crime community. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We have more mind-bending mysteries coming your way. The deaths of Arnold Archambeau and Ruby Bruguier spawned numerous theories, each attempting to explain the baffling circumstances surrounding their disappearance and eventual discovery. Let's examine the evidence and the possibilities that investigators had to consider. The first theory centered on the immediate aftermath of the accident. Could Arnold and Ruby have wandered away in a state of confusion, perhaps suffering from hypothermia? Medical experts note that severe hypothermia can cause what's known as paradoxical undressing, where victims feeling inexplicably hot remove their clothing despite freezing temperatures. However, their clothes were found intact on their bodies, ruling out this particular scenario. FBI investigators proposed another theory, that the couple had initially survived the accident and sought shelter somewhere, only to succumb to the elements later. This theory was supported by the unusual state of preservation of their bodies and clothing. However, it raised more questions. Where had they stayed? Why didn't anyone see them? Why didn't they contact their families or seek help, especially given that they had young children waiting for them? If you're finding these theories as intriguing as they are disturbing, give this video a thumbs up. It helps our content reach others who share our fascination with unsolved mysteries. The discovery locations presented their own set of contradictions. Both bodies were found in an area that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. The ditch was not deep, averaging just 3 feet of water, and was relatively small in area. Local law enforcement officials, who had conducted countless searches of similar drainage ditches, were baffled by their inability to locate the bodies during the initial investigation. The medical examiner's findings added another layer of complexity to the case. While both victims officially died from exposure to the cold, the condition of their bodies suggested they might have died weeks, not months, after the accident. The lack of expected decomposition and the relatively good condition of their clothing didn't align with bodies that had been submerged in water for several months. The timeline itself presents numerous inconsistencies. Arnold's body was discovered after the spring thaw, which might explain its sudden appearance. But Ruby's body wasn't found until 2 months later in the same area, despite multiple searches during that period. The water level had remained relatively constant, making it unlikely that changing conditions had suddenly revealed her body. The impact on the Lake Andes community was profound. In a town of just 800 people, the disappearance and deaths of 2 young parents sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. The case challenged the basic assumptions about small-town safety and the belief that in such a close community, someone would have noticed if Arnold and Ruby were still alive during those missing months. This brings us to our final call to action. If you're enjoying our deep dives into America's most puzzling cold cases, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. We're committed to bringing you the most thorough investigations of cases that continue to baffle law enforcement. The case remains officially unsolved. The FBI's investigation file contains hundreds of pages of interviews, forensic reports, and analysis, yet no definitive conclusion has ever been reached. The circumstances surrounding their deaths were so unusual that the case was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries in 1994, bringing national attention to this small South Dakota town. Several key questions continue to haunt investigators. 1. How did Arnold and Ruby leave the accident scene without leaving any tracks in the snow? 2. Where were they during the months between their disappearance and the discovery of their bodies? 3. Why weren't their bodies found during the numerous searches of the ditch? 4. How do we explain the unusual state of preservation of their bodies and clothing? 5. What accounts for the 2-month gap between the discovery of Arnold's body and Ruby's? The case of Arnold Archambeau and Ruby Bruguier stands as one of South Dakota's most perplexing mysteries. It challenges our understanding of physical evidence, search procedures, and the very nature of small-town life. It reminds us that sometimes, even with modern investigative techniques and resources, some questions remain unanswered. Their young children grew up without their parents. Their families never received the closure they deserved, and the community of Lake Andes was left to grapple with a mystery that defies logical explanation. The frozen waters of that drainage ditch held their secret for months, and in many ways, they hold it still. This case serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most baffling mysteries aren't found in big cities or exotic locations, but in small towns on ordinary winter nights, where the line between explainable and inexplicable can blur like footprints in freshly fallen snow. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of America's most puzzling cold cases. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes the most mysterious cases are the ones closest to home.